Good morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, I have an absolute mountain of notes that I put together for the show today, so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into it. And I figured I'd kind of start the show off on a fun note. I don't think it's ever too early to start looking at 2028 polling data. In fact, I'm fascinated by it. And it's so interesting. Here we are. It's 2026. It's 2026. And here we have the presidential field for 2028 already coalescing. Now, if you look at the Republican side of the ledger, that's fairly simple. Fairly simple. The Republicans are going to have some combination of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. It'll be some combination of those two guys. And the interesting thing about the Republican Party, when you look at the candidates for the Republican Party, the bench is fairly deep for the Republicans. There are so many people like Eric Schmidt. There's all these other people that are very good candidates that could run. But I think the gravity is all with Rubio and Vance at this point. So again, you will see some combination of those two guys. But the Republican Party being relatively stabilized, then you would want to look at the Democrat field, which the 2028 Democrat field is like a clown car that ran over a circus. It is a total laugh fest. Like when you look at the people on this, it's such a joke, man. But the polling has really started shifting in the Democrat field. Here are the current projections. Kamala Harris still maintains pole position in really any poll you look at for 2028. Kamala Harris is by far the candidate in the lead. And this can always change, but right now she's in pole position. So here's Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris right now is trending at 29% for 2028. So there's a 1 in 3 chance that Kamala Harris is the candidate. Kamala Harris is at 29% and by far the leader in the Democrat field for 2028. She's at a +7 trend. Her star is ascendant in the national primary. And it's interesting because you look at her star being ascendant. Do you know who her next closest competitor is? That really hasn't changed either. So the next closest competitor for the Democrat field in 2028 is Gavin Newsom. Well, so here's Gavin Newsom. He's second. And I think anybody that listens to the Foggy Dew knows Gavin Newsom is in a lot of trouble politically. He might be in criminal trouble. But the Democrat Party has Gavin Newsom trending at second. He is at 15%, trending at a -4. Well, he's trending at a -4 because everybody's starting to realize that this guy's finished. So then you might ask, okay, so Gavin Newsom's 2, who's 3? Pete Buttigieg. So here you have Mayor Pete at 11%. Those are the 3 leaders in the clubhouse currently for 2020 for the Democrats. Those are the only 3 people at double digits, because beyond that, you have AOC at 6%, Mark Kelly at 5%, Josh Shapiro at 4%, Cory Booker at 4%, Andy Beshear at 3%, and JB Pritzker at 3%. Now, the funny one that I didn't mention is Tim Walz. You would be shocked to learn that Tim Walz is actually included in this. Tim Walz is currently polling at 3%. So Tim Walz has the same odds as Andy Beshear and JB Pritzker, which is non-existent. So really, just look at that list. Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, Mark Kelly, Shapiro, Booker, Beshear, and Pritzker. A clown car that ran over a circus is probably the most apt description of that collection of misfits. Gavin Newsom will never be elected president and cannot win the primary. So if you take the top 3, you've got AOC, Buttigieg, and Newsom. If you combine AOC, Buttigieg, and Newsom, if you combine their odds, they barely beat Kamala Harris. That's how far out she is. Kamala Harris, 29%, trend +7. And I'm telling you right now, Kamala Harris is the likely candidate for 2028. And she is laying low right now. She's probably trying to stay out of this whole fracas with the DSA ascendant in American politics, meaning the socialist and the Democrat Party. But if Kamala Harris somehow is able to avoid any serious landmines in like the next year or so, going into 2028, she will be the inevitable candidate. And if you're asking me today, I think a reasonable ticket for the Democrat Party in 2028 is going to be Kamala Harris and AOC. Kamala Harris is going to be painted as the legacy moderate, and then they're going to have to shove AOC in as a nod to the socialist base. The mainstream DNC at this point cannot go all in on communism. And I guess if you look at it that way, they can't do that. There are way too many Democrat moderates for them to try to pull something like that off. And what this is going to do is AOC is going to be the trial balloon nationally for communism in the United States. But I'm telling you, what you want to watch is if in November of 2026, you see the socialist wing of that party sweep, like if you see every socialist in a race win, then the calculus is going to change and Kamala Harris will not be palatable. If the DSA sweeps, then AOC will have a legit path in the primary. And it could be at that point that you have an AOC Kamala ticket. It's just so interesting. But I look at all this stuff. If you look at the DNC rubric of what they thought about coming out of 2024, like they're doing their post-analysis of why they lost in 24. But based on the DNC's own rubric of 2024, they even admitted they need a white male. I don't know how excited the base is going to be about an AOC Kamala ticket, regardless of the order in which you put those two. And a guy like Pete Buttigieg is not giving you what you want, and a guy like Newsom has too much baggage. The only other guy that you could look at like a white male in that entire list that's plausible would be Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly would then become the white male in that mix of people, and I guess you can add Mark Cuban to that list. Mark Cuban is kind of the dark horse here. I don't think gets talked about a lot. But if you're asking me today, in the summer of 26, I would think that you'd be looking at Kamala Harris, AOC, Mark Kelly, and Mark Cuban. But I can promise you what's going to happen first. The Democrat Party is going to face a reckoning this November. And a reckoning is the right way to think about it, because if they underperform this coming November, if the Democrat Party underperforms in November of 26, then what's going to happen is that you're going to have calls for a complete overhaul of party leadership. They're already starting to do that. The communist wing is already starting to eat these people. And I promise you right now, if all these moderates start getting smoked by Republicans, it's going to get even crazier on the blue side of the aisle. And the funny thing to watch is if the moderate Democrats fail and the Democrat socialists overperform, then the legacy people are going to get absolutely smoked here. But I can promise you what's going to happen one way or the other is you're going to have a large-scale DNC civil war. And the funny thing, like, even looking at this, like, if you told me like 3 years ago that AOC would be a legit presidential contender, I would have laughed in your face. But if you look at what's occurring in the body politic and where she stands in the Democrat Party, her star is ascendant. She is a kingmaker now. What AOC says has weight in the Democrat Party. But I can promise you, what's happening now is that AOC's odds are going to start being inverted with Gavin Newsom. She's going to overtake Gavin Newsom as far as polling goes. And the funny thing about it, like, look at the party. The socialist wing of the Democrat Party is swelling its ranks. But it's just totally fascinating to think about these collection of people that would even be in a position to run for president of the United States. But the funny thing about it is that 2028 is the Alamo for these people. They have to win, and I don't think they can with this group of people. And I guess, geez, I mean, 2028 is the Democrat Alamo, and guess what? It's America's also. We got to hold on here. Anyway, I'll be watching it. So I got a ton of text messages this week about this Graham Platner guy out of Maine, so I want to go ahead and address this. And I guess if you listen to the Foggy Dew, you're probably paying fairly close attention to politics. So my first thought on this whole thing with Graham Platner, this is totally awesome what's going on in Maine. Now, the base of it is that Graham Platner had 165,000 people that voted for him in the Maine primary. So 165,000 people wanted Graham Platner to be the Democrat candidate for Senate in Maine. They didn't seem to care that 165,000 people, they didn't seem to care about the Nazi tattoo. They didn't seem to care about the weird sexual innuendos and behavior that this guy had exhibited. None of that apparently mattered to the 165,000 people that pulled a lever for this guy. But it just occurs over the last couple of weeks that the rape allegation became a bridge too far for the popular consciousness. And the funny thing about this, I really don't care about Graham Platner one way or the other. I just want to look at the big picture and what this means nationally. Because I guess, first of all, you have to look at the Democrat Party when you're looking at a person like Graham Platner. This guy's background, Graham Platner's background, was obvious to anybody that wanted to dig into it. It was there all along. And the funny thing to me about a guy like Graham Platner, even if you look outside of Maine, like the Democrat Party vetted this guy. He was vetted and approved by the Democrat Party, not just in Maine, but nationally. He was endorsed by all the party leaders. You had Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, Kamala. They were all like, this guy's great. And the funny thing is, they endorsed this guy, and none of his baggage mattered when they gave their endorsement. And you know why it didn't matter? You know why none of that baggage mattered? Is because Platner is a vessel for liberalism. He is a vessel. He is a mouthpiece. He is a foot soldier to the party. He will do whatever the party leaders tell him to do. But Graham Platner was not done in by the Nazi tattoo. He wasn't done in by all this stuff. What he was done in by is poll numbers. That's the cardinal sin to the Democrat Party. Because if you look at it, if you look at Graham Platner's, like the polling numbers for Graham Platner, Platner was a +8 coming out of the Democrat primary for Senate. But the funny thing about it is you talk about 165,000 people voted in the primary, literally a fraction of the electorate voted in the primary. And that's always the point, isn't it? Nobody votes in these primaries. Because I can tell you what happens is the zealots vote in the primary. Average Democrat voters don't want anything to do with this guy. It's all the fringe elements that vote in the primary, not the normal average blue dog Democrat. Let me put it another way. People that have jobs that are Democrats are not voting in the primary. It's the leech class that vote for people like Graham Platner. Nobody wants a guy with a Nazi tattoo. Nobody in America, it's so interesting to me looking at how voting works. Nobody in America pays attention to this stuff until the actual vote occurs. The first time this even hits the consciousness of somebody in a state is when a primary occurs. When a primary occurs, people start paying attention. And it's just like this happened in Maine. People were not paying attention in Maine. And then all of a sudden, voila, you're now dealing with a guy who's a communist with a Nazi tattoo and all this crazy behavior. And this is the horse that you're going to ride into the barn. That's very shocking to the average voter. Well, of course, when this became apparent that this is the horse that the Democrat Party wanted to ride, normal people saw what was occurring and they just checked out. So this guy was a +8 coming out of the primary, and his poll numbers absolutely cratered when people got a good look at this guy. Graham Platner was at a -8 trend, meaning he was underwater against Susan Collins, the Republican. He was at a -8 trend when the last rape allegations hit, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. If this guy had stayed in the race, he would have gotten absolutely nuked off the planet by Susan Collins in the head-to-head Republican-Democrat. And the funny thing about it is that Susan Collins is not some hard right-winger. Susan Collins, the Republican candidate, is a relatively moderate person. And if you're going to look at like a Graham Platner as opposed to Susan Collins has been there for like 30 years. She's the sober choice. So, of course, Graham Platner cannot stay in there with all this baggage, the poll numbers dipping like that. So what the Democrat Party did is they submarine this guy. They don't care about this rape allegation. They didn't care about the Nazi tattoo. So what happened to Graham Platner was fairly obvious. His poll numbers cratered, he was out of money, and the donations dried up. So Graham Platner was in a political tailspin is really what happened. And then the knives came out by the Democrat leadership. This guy was a dead man walking politically once normal people got a good look at who they really wanted to put out there. So the party forces him out. They force him to concede. And now you have it where the party of democracy is going to overturn the will of 165,000 voters. The Democrat Party does not care that Graham Platner was duly elected. They didn't care about that. He was duly elected. That is his primary. He won it. But they yanked him anyway. Democracy be damned. And now that he's out, what do? It's not going to go to the people for a referendum. It's not going to go to the people for a vote. What's going to happen is the Democrat Party in the state of Maine, so you can have Democrat insiders in the state of Maine meeting by the end of July to pick the next puppet that they want to put in for this seat. And look at, let's be honest, when these Democrat insiders meet to pick the next candidate, they will give to the voter. They're not going to be looking at what that individual candidate's positions are. You know why? Because they don't care. All they're going to be looking at is polling. That's all they care about here. They don't care about this person's positions. They care about the polling data. And why is that the only metric that they're going to look at? It's because they want to win. They don't care what the vessel is. You could put Kermit the Frog out there, and if Kermit the Frog was trending above Susan Collins, they would pick Kermit the Frog. They picked a guy with a Nazi tattoo. He was useful until his poll numbers weren't. And the funny thing is, this isn't the first time you've seen this, though, is it? Because this is very much how Biden was discarded for Kamala Harris. The minute Joe Biden didn't have utility, he was submarined for Kamala Harris. And this is coming to you from the party that's trying to save democracy. And that's the pattern that you should recognize. The voters made a decision. The voters in America made a decision. The voters in Maine made a decision. The voters in Maine made a decision, and the party leadership decided to overrule the will of the voters. This is the same Democrat Party that screams about fascism, authoritarianism. They're ignoring the will of the voter, and somehow their voters just keep lapping it up. And I guess if you look at it, democracy is best served when the party picks the candidate. Joe Biden, Graham Platner, the pattern's obvious. Look at the polls. That's what the party does. So you got Susan Collins red in a hypothetical matchup. Then Democrat Party is now looking at who polls best against Susan Collins. Well, you have Janet Mills would be your first choice. Janet Mills is the ex-governor of Maine. Mills, if you poll Mills against Collins, Mills gets 35%, Susan Collins gets 48%. Well, in that hypothetical matchup, Mills would lose, so she's out. The next person you would move to in Maine polling would be Jordan Wood. Jordan Wood up against Susan Collins. Wood loses 38% to 47%. So Woods is an obvious loser in that polling scenario. If you look at Platner, Platner is actually better than those two. So Platner was actually at a 42%. Collins would have been at 47%. So Platner would have lost. The only hypothetical left that could win is a guy named Troy Jackson. So Troy Jackson in a hypothetical matchup against Susan Collins, Troy Jackson would win that. Troy Jackson's poll numbers are at 49%. Susan Collins would get 44%. So at this point, the smart money, when these Democrat insiders meet at the end of July, the smart money would be on Troy Jackson emerging as the candidate. Because he's the only one that's right side up when you look at projected polling. And I guess you might want to ask yourself, who's Troy Jackson? You probably never even heard that name. Well, Troy Jackson was a blue-collar logger. He worked as a logger that was also in the primary, but lost to Graham Platner. And the funny thing about Troy Jackson, he's a real sweetheart. This guy has already admitted to mortgage fraud. So they want to put in they would put in a guy that's admitted to mortgage fraud. And apparently this guy allegedly threw a glass bottle at a woman's head in a bar altercation. A real sweetheart, man. That's your last hope, Obi-Wan. Are you kidding me? This is the guy that they would go with. So they want to ditch a guy with a Nazi tattoo, and they want to get a guy that committed mortgage fraud that's chucking bottles at people's heads. This is how they operate. But again, it doesn't matter. Again, they would get Kermit the Frog, because if Kermit the Frog was pulling ahead of Susan Collins, that's who they would go with. And no other candidate seems viable. And the funny thing about all this, they don't have a lot of time here. They have about 3 to 4 months to figure this out. And let's be honest, if you're a Democrat voter in Maine, you'd probably be freaking out a little bit about right now. I mean, you had you went from Nazi tattoo guy to fraudster, beer bottle thrower, and that's the best we got? Like, if you're a Democrat voter, you'd look at it and be like, these are the best candidates that we can put together against a person like Susan Collins? How pathetic is that? That's the best that they can field. So again, that convention will be later in July when they pick this person up. But the microscope on this locally, nationally, is going to increase. It's going to be wild, man. And I had to laugh because people are looking at Platner and nobody is paying attention to Michigan. And I told you guys to watch this whole thing. This whole scenario is now unfolding in Michigan as well. I talked about it, I think, either the last podcast or the podcast before. The Democrat leader for Senate in the state of Michigan is a guy named Abdul El Sayed. This El Sayed character is on track to win the Michigan Democratic senatorial race. Primary, pardon me. He's in pole position. He's at 35%. He's polling 6 points ahead of the closest competitor. It is now emerging about this guy that is in pole position to win the Democratic primary. This guy will not disclose his finances. He says he will not disclose his finances until after the primary is over. The funny thing about this is now there are more cracks emerging. This El Sayed person also claimed to be a doctor. He claimed to be a doctor, but when he was pressed on that, he's now backtracking on the fact that he's a doctor. MSNBC, the liberal mouthpiece, is reporting that he has no medical license. So again, to be totally clear, he has no medical license and is claiming to be a doctor. And what does that smell like to you? It smells like, to me, it's another bogus candidate waiting to be exposed. And I guess if you look beyond all this just clown car of candidates that they have, not just in Michigan and Maine, the other issue with all of this is the media. And I mentioned Biden a minute or two ago. Biden and Platner, they share the same media connection. That's the connective tissue here, is the media. The media picked a side. That's what they did with Biden. That's what they did with Platner. The media decided to plant their flag on a side. What happened is with Biden is that the media ignored Biden's dementia. They ignored his mumbling, his erratic dementia behavior. They ignored the wandering off. They ignored the vacant stare. They waved that all away. None of that mattered. Not only did it not matter, they excused that behavior, they dismissed it, they didn't investigate it. What they did is the media concealed Biden, protected him from scrutiny, and it's the same deal with Platner. Nazi tattoo on your chest, whatever. He's changed his ways. He saw the error of his ways. They looked at Graham Platner and thought that Graham Platner locking himself in a porta potty with a woman was totally fine. And the funny thing about it is the Democrat Party is supposed to be vetting these people. They're not doing that, and neither is the media. The media does not investigate or vet these people at all, and that is totally obvious now. Not only are they not vetting these people, what they're doing is they put excuses out, and then they conceal all this stuff to achieve a result. That's how they pick a side. And the funny thing about it is this shielding of the candidate does the party absolutely no favor. So the media is actually doing a disservice to the Democrat voter. When you shield a person like Joe Biden from scrutiny from the average voter and the cable watcher, when Biden malfunctions on TV, it becomes very obvious to everyone. You shielded him, and the minute he's out on his own, he malfunctions. And like, if you look at that, the media narrative that this was the best version of Joe Biden collapsed in real time with the world watching when he glitched on live TV. And the minute that guy glitched, the lie was exposed. And again, what that does, that is the net effect of making the party and the media look totally ridiculous. Just like Biden, Graham Platner was protected and excused until he was no longer useful, same as Biden. It's funny, even when this whole thing came out, I was watching MSNBC the other night. Jen Psaki on MSNBC said the Platner thing was, quote, enraging for all of us. Jen Psaki is the same person that has sat here for months defending this guy. She ran cover for Graham Platner. She excused away the fact that this guy had a Nazi tattoo. She excused away all the sexual allegations that were levied against this guy. She never asked any questions. Not only did she not ask questions, she defended him. And it's so interesting talking about MSNBC because later that night when I was again, I love watching MSNBC. I saw another pundit on MSNBC saying something similar. So you had a lady named Molly Jong-Fast who literally is a communist. She's a liberal pundit. This is what she said. I wrote it down. So Molly Jong-Fast, a liberal pundit on MSNBC, claims said she was, quote, sold a character arc, end quote, about Platner. Sold a character arc. So his handlers were telling the media, oh, he's a good guy. He's really fought through all his demons. Yeah, he had a Nazi tattoo, but that was just a lark when he was younger. But here you have a media pundit, somebody that is supposed to be on TV telling you the truth, supposed to be an investigative journalist. She's sitting here telling you that she, as a liberal pundit, was sold a bill of goods about Platner. She's claiming, this is a media pundit claiming that she was duped by the Democrat Party. And it's so funny. I was sitting there listening to this lady, like, she's sitting there saying she got duped by the Democrat Party. Well, gee whiz, no, it's like small wonder they got everything wrong in COVID. Whatever the government said, they just swallowed it whole. They didn't think about any of it. They just swallowed propaganda piece after propaganda piece. And you would think if you fell for it that many times, you'd actually start asking some questions. But it's very obvious to me as a dispassionate observer, they're duped about everything. You know why? Because they're not that smart. Because a person like Jen Psaki, all these liberal pundits, they're just puppets and parrots for the party. They're actors that read off a script. But look, I hope Jackson wins this thing, and I hope it's a disaster. And I hope the same thing happens in Michigan. I hope El Said wins. I hope this guy wins and he gets totally exposed. I think it's the most interesting thing in the world. But I think the media is just lying out of their face. I think the Democrat Party is lying out of their face. And the pattern for how they treat their candidates and what they expect out of them is becoming patently obvious, and it's gross. So switching gears, I had a couple things I wanted to go through, and this might be a little bit of a longer rant. But it just occurs to me that one of the best parts about socialism or communism is the hierarchy of it. And I'm going to say something that I'm going to repeat over and over again. Socialism is good for the socialist, and communism is good for the communist. The same patterns with socialism and communism repeat themselves over and over again. The leaders of these movements, they claim commonality with the people. The people that run socialist and communist movements, they always claim that they are the people's champion. And invariably what happens in communism or in socialism, invariably the leaders of those movements, they accumulate assets and power at the top of the food chain. And Orwell in Animal Farm, the novel Animal Farm, he outlines this phenomenon. And if you haven't read Animal Farm, it's probably my second favorite book behind 1984. Animal Farm is an allegory for socialism and communism. And what happens in Animal Farm is that the farm animals, they rebel against the human master of man or farm. So the animals rebel against their master. The animals want a free society. They want a society that they can run equally. They basically want a farm where nobody's their overlord and all the animals can be free and equal. The animals want a farm where equality, freedom, they want a utopia. Everyone's equal and happy. Their dreams of equality are achieved initially when they overthrow the human master. The humans are overthrown and the future is bright. So the revolution of the animals on the farm was successful. So the revolution has occurred, it's successful, but very shortly after the humans are overthrown, the revolution is hijacked. What happened is part of the revolutionary group was a bunch of pigs. In an animal farm, the pigs from the farm take charge. So when the pigs decide that they're a little bit better than the other farm animals, the society devolves. The utopia is not achieved. And what happens is that when the pigs assume control of the revolution, the farm ends up descending into a dictatorship. The pigs assume power. So the pigs assume power over the farm, and what happens is it reverts into a dystopian state. It devolves into its dystopian state where the conditions are worse than when the humans were in charge. So the pigs, after the revolution, created a system called animalism. And animalism is an allegory for communism. The pigs, when they created animalism, described their system initially as a complete system of thought. They created 7 commandments that would guarantee equality for the people. So the pigs create the framework of their society, and then they promptly break the rules, which is exactly what happens in socialism and communism. They break those rules almost immediately. And why would they break the rules? Is because the pigs in Animal Farm viewed themselves as leaders. And leaders, by the socialist or communist viewpoint, leaders don't have time to follow rules. They're more important than the rules. And the pigs in the story are more important than the other animals. Leaders don't need commandments. So after the revolution occurs on the farm, and after the publishing of the commandments that are going to guide the society to equality, the pigs start adopting human behavior. What did they do? They started smoking. They walked on 2 legs. They engage in trade. The pigs end up moving into the farmhouse. The pigs are enjoying the good life. So the pigs sleep inside while the other animals, the commoners sleep outside in the rain. And the pigs in the story see this as their right. Well, the pigs see this as their right, and what they decide to do in the book is they decide to alter the commandments. They alter the rules. They alter the rules, and by altering the rules, what that is it's an allegory by Orwell for changing the historical record. In communism, you don't want to remember the past. Everything is malleable. What the pigs are doing by changing the commandments is they're revising history to justify their own power. The commandments are therefore changed. Dogma and order are then therefore replaced by caste and propaganda. And the pigs, with their newfound power that they gave themselves, they become lords of the manor. And the funny thing about it is when the book closes, when Animal Farm wraps up, the pigs are playing cards inside. They're playing cards inside with the humans that they're now trading with. So you have pigs and humans inside the house playing cards, while the farm animals that assisted in the revolution watch through the window. Animals are not allowed inside the house. And the funny thing about it is the other farm animals now view the pigs and the humans the same way. They cannot tell them apart. Again, Animal Farm is an allegory. The whole book, Animal Farm, Orwell's Animal Farm, is an allegory for the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. The pigs' rise to power is a direct mirror to the rise of Lenin and his oppressive bureaucracy. What they used in Russia and what they used on Animal Farm, they used propaganda, they used fear, power accumulation, erosion of the struggle. And it's not just 1917 Bolshevik Russia. The common themes out of Animal Farm were evident in Russia, in China, in Cambodia, Laos, Spain, Cuba, all these places where socialism and communism rose. The same behaviors occur every time in a socialist uprising. And I was kind of thinking through when I was writing this whole thing about Animal Farm. One of my favorite examples here in the States was the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I have to admit, Occupy Wall Street was one of my favorite things. It was a leftist, populist, progressive movement. And if you'll remember, Occupy Wall Street occurred back in 2011 in New York City. Occupy Wall Street was a ridiculous movement that was marketed as a populist uprising against capitalism. And the funny thing about Occupy Wall Street, the goals of Occupy Wall Street were to address income inequality. What they wanted to do is they wanted to expose capitalism as too greedy. They wanted to spell out the ills of capitalism. Finance, greed, money in politics. They had all these like lofty goals to get rid of these things. And the funny thing about it is all of the tropes that they used, and again, they're tropes. All of the tropes that were used by Occupy Wall Street are the same tropes that are used in socialist and communist uprisings. Do you remember their slogan? The slogan of Occupy Wall Street is, "We are the 99%. They're the people's champion." They're the people's champion. They're the pigs on the farm. They're the pigs of the revolution. And you might ask yourself, why did Colin like Occupy Wall Street so much? I loved it. And the reason I loved it because it was totally juvenile. There was not one new law that was proposed or came out of Occupy Wall Street. It wasn't a serious thing. It wasn't a serious thing that actually looked at like changing policy, changing laws. What Occupy Wall Street was an emotional bloodletting. It was a temper tantrum. It would be like a child stamping its foot, letting you know they're upset. That's really what it was. But my favorite part about Occupy Wall Street was the money. So the minute that these narcissist Marxists decided to get their mug in front of a camera at Occupy Wall Street, money started flowing into the rebellion. You had like Silicon Valley people like pumping money into Occupy Wall Street. So all this money started coming into Occupy Wall Street, and Occupy Wall Street at its core was supposed to be like this grassroots power to the people deal. Well, the minute the money started coming in, what they did is they started forming committees. They started forming leadership. So they start forming all this stuff. The minute the dollar showed up, they started getting serious. So all these donations are coming, all this cash is pouring in. Where did all that money go? Well, guess what? The leaders spent it. They spent it. The zealots, the leadership cadre, the zealots that were screaming about income inequality took all the money. They were putting themselves, do you remember? They were putting themselves up in nice hotels. The leaders of Occupy Wall Street got nice hotels, nice meals, nice new clothes. They were brought on CNN. They were feted by the media. And the funny thing about it is it's so typical and so obvious. The leaders of the movement need those trappings. The leaders need a nice hotel room so they can plan the revolution better for the commoners. I said it before, the leaders of Occupy Wall Street were the pigs on Animal Farm because some animals are more equal than others. Some animals are more equal than others, and I guess the leaders of Occupy Wall Street were more equal than the others. They're the leaders, man. They don't have time to sleep in a barn. They don't have time to sleep in the rain. And that's really what derailed Occupy Wall Street. If you look at it, the hypocrisy of the people, the hypocrisy of the leadership of Occupy Wall Street is what derailed the whole movement. Well, and to be fair, not only their behavior, but the clear lack of a goal was probably a big part of it as well. But this explosion of emotion was totally non-directed. So they had no measurable goal. They had nothing to attain, and the whole thing fizzled out. And if you look at Occupy, it only lasted like 120 days. The whole thing only lasted 120 days, but within weeks of this thing just popping up out of the ether, you had this leadership structure emerge, and you already within weeks had this disparity of the people and the leadership in the movement. And the people that were the leaders in the Occupy Wall Street movement, they did very, very well. The socialists usually do. Socialism is usually always good for the socialist leader. And it's funny because like that phenomenon is happening in New York City yet again. New York City is now the hotbed of communism in the United States. And I had to laugh at this whole thing because this keeps going on because New York City under Mayor Mandami just submitted a $126 billion city budget. That's their yearly budget, $126 billion city budget. And to be fair, if you look at it, they keep talking about how they balance the books and all this stuff. They didn't do any of it. A lot of the funding came from New York, from Albany. They got $8 billion subsidy come in from the state, but they have a $126 billion budget. Comrade Kathy Hochul then is covering some of this budget. But then the question you might want to ask yourself is, do they have 126 billion in revenues coming in? No, they don't. They plan on funding this $126 billion budget with a slew of nice new taxes for the citizens of New York. That's how they're going to pay for their new budget. That's how they're going to pay for their communist wish list, is by a just treasure trove of new taxes. Well, it's interesting because that tax money then is going to be redistributed by the New York City mayor and the city council. And what they're doing in this $126 billion budget, it's free this, free that. The problem with it is nothing is free. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul with taxes. So what happened is in New York City, under the guise of affordability, the veneer of affordability, your taxes are being raised. So nothing is really affordable now in New York because absolutely everyone, from the poorest among them to the most rich, everyone is paying more now in taxes. All people, all businesses now paying more in taxes. Nothing about that sounds affordable to me. And the best part about this whole situation is that the pigs are in charge. And it's the pigs from Animal Farm. A bill was just introduced in New York City. New York City, with its $126 billion budget that's being financed by taxes. Another new bill was introduced. You ready for this? That bill would raise the pay for the mayor, elected city officials, and all city leadership positions. I'm going to say that again. This bill that they just introduced is going to raise the pay for the mayor, elected city officials, and all city leadership positions. And just so you're aware, Mandami would be paid more than the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas combined. So the ruling class is getting a pay raise. So they're going to get a pay raise while everybody else is paying more in taxes. And you know why that is? You know why they need a pay raise? Because some animals are more equal than others. Are you curious about the percentage? These people, they're voting on this themselves. They're voting to give themselves more money. They are now voting to give themselves an 18.2% increase in pay. So the socialists and communists that are running New York City are going to get an 18.2% pay raise, while everybody else is going to get their taxes increased. And the addendum on this, on top of the 18.2% that they're going to get on base pay, they're also making themselves eligible for a 2% raise every year afterward. So an 18.2% raise and a 2% increase every year, a nice 2% bump. And you might be curious who's going to pay those new salaries. That's right, the taxpayer. The animals in the barn are going to need to cough up for the new overlords. Mandami is going to, this is Mandami's pay. Mandami is going to go from $258,000 a year. He is now going to be making $306,000 a year. So yet again, the pattern emerges from Animal Farm. The communist, the socialist, they end up keeping a bigger piece of the pie for themselves. Communism is good for the communist. And why? Because they're the luminaries of the revolution. They are the carriers of the people's wrath. They're the champions of the downtrodden. It's the same story over and over again. They're the champions for the people, but trust me, they're going to eat first. And I don't know much, but history is undefeated and history is batting 1,000. And the funny thing about it is, like, when you look at all this stuff and you study Karl Marx knew that communism wouldn't work. Do you know that when he wrote Mein Kampf, not Mein Kampf, when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, he knew that communism wouldn't work. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto as a hypothetical political system. He knew it wouldn't work practically. And let's be honest, it really never has. And the reason that communism doesn't work is because man is his own worst enemy. And that's the brilliance of the founders when you look at the American political system as opposed to every other system of government. And the reason why is because our founders knew that man was fallen. They knew that man was a failed, fallen creature. And that's why in America, our rights come from God. If rights come from God, then man cannot change them. Nobody on earth can. So if our rights come from God, they are immutable. I couldn't discharge my rights if I wanted to then. That predicate of having your rights come from God allows the restraint of our worst impulses. Greed, avarice, power. Those base emotions drive man. And having the Constitution underwritten by God restrains our worst impulses. It's like the commandments in Animal Farm. The pigs, the leaders changed the commandments. You can't do that with God's will. But if you look at this stuff, Animal Farm, Occupy Wall Street, Red China, Red Russia, the fledgling communist movement in New York City, the worst impulses of mankind are laid bare in these communist uprisings. There is no restraint. Every place, every time this was tried, it failed. And people always think they can do socialism better. You could look at a history book and see 100 failed examples of socialism, and yet somebody still thinks that they can do it better. Whoever thinks that they think I'm more benevolent, I'm more wise, I'm more judicious, and the people that did it before, that tried it before, didn't get it quite right, but I know I can do it right this time. And what that is, every time they do it, it's totally delusional and they're denying history. But here you have Mandami and the people in New York with an 18.2% pay increase for their benevolence and leadership and luminosity. 18.2% pay increase and a 2% annual bump. And you know what pays? The citizens. Again, history's undefeated. The original commandments of Animal Farm included 7 commandments. The 7th commandment in that list said all animals are equal. All animals are equal, but it morphed into something quite different when the pigs took charge. It was changed to say all animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And if you look at Mandami and all these other communists anywhere in history, Mandami and his crew think that they are more equal than others, and that is the failure of communism. There is no restraining principle. So anyway, I've got a ton more to get to, but I keep going too long, and I don't want to do that. So I have a show note. So I am going to be out on business next week, and then my wife turned 50 about a week ago. So we are actually taking the kids, and we are going to be out of the country for almost 2 weeks. So I have some sad news, but the Foggy Dew is going to be on the shelf for about 3 weeks. So I'm going to be writing a ton of show material. I'm going to be writing a ton of stories, but we will not have any new episodes coming out for about 3 weeks. I might be able to get on one late next week. I'll do my best, but we're going to have a little bit of a summer gap here with the Foggy Dew. So anyway, love you guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.